swiping right, staring at a group chat, waiting for someone to text back, wondering if it's too soon to double text. We act like modern dating is some uniquely chaotic invention. It's not. Humans have been figuring out how to pair off for thousands of years. And honestly, some of it makes Tinder look tame. Let's go back and see how ancient humans actually did dating and relationships. First, the biggest myth to bust right away: for most of ancient history, dating as we know it basically didn't exist. There was no getting coffee, no going steady. In Greco-Roman societies, marriage wasn't about love at all. It was treated as a legal duty every citizen was expected to fulfill. Outside of the basic legal requirement to get married, the law didn't dictate how a couple actually met. And for most couples, that job fell to their parents, who did the matchmaking. In ancient Rome specifically, you weren't wooing your crush. You were wooing their dad. The oldest living male in the family, called the paterfamilias, held absolute authority over his children and had the right and duty to seek out a valuable match, sometimes arranging a betrothal while his kid was still young. Daughters technically had one loophole, though. If the proposed husband turned out to have a genuinely bad character, she could refuse the match. Not exactly swiping left, but it's something. And if you couldn't rely on family alone, there was a whole industry for this. Professional matchmakers actually existed in antiquity, facilitating introductions, negotiating terms, and even verifying a potential spouse's background, which is basically an ancient background check before a first date. They'd charge a fee for their services, sometimes worth as much as 1/20th of the dowry being arranged. So matchmaking was a legitimate, profitable business, not some quirky side hustle. Once a match was set, there were actual rituals that would look shockingly familiar today. An engagement ring was a typical gift worn on the third finger of the left hand, the exact same finger we use now, because Romans believed a nerve ran directly from that finger to the heart. Brides wore white and a veil, walked down with a bridesmaid at their side, and the couple even picked a lucky day for the ceremony to avoid bad omens. Not that different from checking a date's compatibility on an app today, just with more superstition and fewer group chats. Now, here's where it gets more complicated and more interesting. What about people who weren't straight? Did ancient LGBT people even get to find partners? The honest answer is yes, and in some ancient societies, way more openly than you'd expect. Ancient writers regularly just glossed over a person's sexual orientation entirely, because it usually wasn't treated as remarkable or worth commenting on unless it affected some specific event. In Rome, married men regularly had male lovers on the side, and the only real stigma attached to any of it wasn't about who you loved. It was about which role you took in the relationship. Status and perceived masculinity mattered far more than gender did. Julius Caesar himself openly had same-sex relationships, and rivals tried to use it to discredit him politically, but he was far too dominant a general and statesman for it to actually damage his reputation. Some of history's most well-documented same-sex relationships were genuinely committed and public. Roman Emperor Hadrian fell for a young man named Antinous, and the two traveled together across the ancient world, from Athens to Alexandria, in what historians describe as a deeply devoted relationship, one so significant that Hadrian mourned Antinous for the rest of his life after his death. And this wasn't just a Rome thing. In ancient Greece, there was even a military unit called the Sacred Band of Thebes, made up entirely of male couples who exchanged vows of devotion to each other before going into battle side by side. Now, a bit of important nuance here, because ancient Greek same-sex relationships between men often looked structurally very different from anything we'd recognize today, tied to specific age-based customs of that era that don't map onto modern relationships at all. It's a genuinely different social system, not simply an ancient version of modern dating. What about women? Unfortunately, because ancient societies were so male-centered, far less was documented about relationships between women, though historians have found real evidence of romantic and sexual love between women, and there's record of female-female unions existing in parts of ancient Egypt as well. The most famous name tied to this is the poet Sappho, whose surviving work is actually where the modern word sapphic comes from. And it wasn't just the Greeks and Romans. In ancient Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, evidence from both artwork and literature shows that same-sex relationships were common enough to be depicted right alongside opposite-sex ones, without any special distinction. Now let's head further east, because China had its own completely distinct system, and its own surprising history with same-sex love too. In ancient Chinese society, marriage was never decided by a young couple's own feelings. It was decided entirely by their parents' wishes. Matchmaking was serious work, typically handled by elderly women who specialized in pairing couples together, and it definitely wasn't casual. There was an entire formal process known as the 3 letters and 6 etiquettes, covering a betrothal letter, a gift letter listing exactly what was being given, and a wedding letter used the day the groom actually met his bride. And the vetting process could get almost bureaucratic. Families would secretly exchange details about the couple, then enter a phase literally called comparing notes, scrutinizing the couple's social standing, age, and birth sign before moving forward. And people who shared the same surname weren't allowed to marry each other at all, no matter how compatible they seemed. Basically, a background check crossed with a horoscope reading, run entirely by your relatives. The proper marrying age skewed young, too, around 20 for men and just 16 for women. And polygamy was legally allowed all the way up until the end of the Qing dynasty in the early 1900s, specifically so a man could try again for a son if his first wife couldn't produce an heir. But here's the part that surprises most people. Ancient China actually has one of the most well-documented histories of same-sex love in the ancient world, and it's baked directly into the language. There's a term, cut sleeve, and the origin story is genuinely sweet. Emperor Ai of the Han Dynasty was napping with his male lover, Dong Xian, asleep on his arm, and rather than wake him up to get out of bed, the emperor simply cut off his own sleeve. From then on, cut sleeve became a lasting euphemism historians used for men loving men, and Emperor Ai wasn't some rare exception. One historian who specializes in this era argues that all 10 emperors who ruled the first 2 centuries of the Han Dynasty were openly bisexual. Since marriage in that culture was mainly about uniting 2 families rather than romance, a husband was generally free to pursue romantic love elsewhere, and it wasn't seen as any kind of contradiction to have both a wife and a male lover at the same time. This wasn't scandalous or hidden either. Ancient court historians openly wrote about rulers having male favorites, and the tradition of a politically influential male companion continued for centuries afterward. So between Rome's committed male couples, Greece's sacred band, and China's cut-sleeve emperors, one thing becomes pretty clear. Love finding a way, regardless of gender, isn't some modern development. It's been part of the human story for as long as we've been writing anything down at all. Zooming all the way out, the big takeaway is this. Love, attraction, and the drive to pair up with someone are exactly as old as humanity itself. What's actually changed isn't the desire, it's the system around it. We went from parents and paid matchmakers controlling the entire process to swiping through an app on your own phone at 1 a.m. The rings, the white dresses, the superstitions about lucky days. Echoes of all of it are still sitting quietly inside our modern weddings and relationships. Next time your dating life feels chaotic, just remember, at least nobody's dad is currently negotiating your dowry. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that hits closer to home than you'd expect. I'll see you in the next one.